Bitte. Grüezi miteinander. Wir bleiben heute Abend auf Mundart. Ich gehe von oben runter, von Theorie auf Praxis. Aber nicht für lange. That's just to say that I was in Zurich for 7 years, and that's what I learned in Zurich after 7 years, so that's okay. Und wenn wir aber für die Gegend sind und redet dann Mundart, dann geht es mir auch gut. Also österreichische Mundart ist die Schweizer Mundart, es geht. Aber, gone auf Englisch. Okay, so I had a beer, so with the beer, now my Swiss German is moving along, so that's okay. This is a brand new talk, so this is the first time I've given this talk. This is work that I've been doing for about the last 4 years, and chose this particular time instead of giving my usual talk to give this one. And I see someone with their finger pointing up in the back. Does that mean that it's not loud enough? No, it is. It's loud enough. That's good, because it's pretty loud up here. All right. Normally, since about 2009, I've been giving a talk which is what is software engineering in the 21st century? So in 2000, I decided software engineering was a nonsense term. It's a contradiction in terms. It's got no meaning. And then a couple of years later, I studied up on what is engineering and some other things and decided there was an actual meaningful definition to the term software engineering. And I was writing about that since about 2003. And that's the talk that I've been giving like about since 2009 everywhere. But decided that it's time now to like split open some new chapters of that. So in this talk, I'm going to give you a quick piece through the software engineering. It's got 5 chapters to it. Well, the talk I'm going to expand for you tonight is the 5th chapter. So let's take a look at how that goes. It starts with this one slide in which I put all of software development inside of one slide. In fact, more than software development, every kind of team-based design activity fits on this slide, including engineering, software development, business initiatives, theater, journalism, a bunch of other things like that. But let's just use the word software for the moment. When we see a group of people developing software, what is it we see? If for a moment we don't have any analogies, no metaphors, we just look at what's present, what we see are people, and they're doing one of 3 things. Either they're inventing something, or they're communicating something, or they're deciding something. Those are the only 3 moves, and I include programming as communicating to the computer. What they're doing is they're solving a problem, and it's a problem that they don't understand. Why don't they understand it? Well, they just got started. Of course they don't understand it, and the problem keeps changing out from underneath them. They're creating a solution that they don't understand. Why don't they understand it? Well, of course, they just got started creating the solution. Of course they don't understand it. And the solution keeps changing out from underneath them. They're using languages like programming languages that, guess what? They don't understand and keep changing out from under them. So they don't understand the problem, they don't understand the solution, they don't understand the language of expression, and all 3 of those are changing at the same time. The ultimate interpreter of their communication is this computer, which is completely unforgiving of error. Now I have that underlined because that's true in software, it's true in chemical engineering, it's true in civil engineering. If it's the audience is humans, like if it's a business initiative or if it's theater, then the audience, the interpreter is forgiving of error. But for us, the interpreter is unforgiving. Everybody is making decisions, and every decision that anybody makes has got ripple consequences that go across other people, and we're resource limited. We don't have enough time, we don't have enough people, we don't have stuff. So there on one slide is everything we really need to know to make sense out of our profession and to make judgments as to how to improve what's going on. We're always dealing with people. It's a pure mental activity. Knowledge is fluctuating. Decisions have got ripple consequences, and we're resource limited, right? That's where we're going. That's the problem we're dealing with. So there's 5 chapters, and I thank my friend in Paris, Jerry Derbier, who made this cute little origami thing. I don't have a name for what it is, but it's got 5 parts to it. I'll talk about these in turn. Craft, we have to understand how to work with the materials that we've got. Cooperative game is something I've written about a long time, since about 1998, that we're cooperating like we're playing a game with strategies and moves and positions. We're trying to win this game. There's a whole aspect of a managing flow of decisions and flow of artifacts. This part I'll focus on tonight, which is knowledge acquisition as a primary activity, which is that all don't know what problem you're solving, don't know the solution, don't know the language. We'll wrestle with that. And finally, there's this area that I call self-awareness. And so everything else is theory, but self-awareness is actual people on the project. So I'll go quickly through 4 of those and then spend the bulk of the time in the 5th area, which is the main purpose of this talk. So I'll start with the self-awareness. Self-awareness thing says a couple of things. First of all, everything else is theory, but who shows up on your project are actual people, and the actual people who show up on your project don't match the theory. They are whatever they are when they walk in the door. Happy, sad, whatever they are. But if you look at good teams, they become aware of who they are individually and as a team. They become aware of each other's strong points and these other weak points. And they start to compensate for them. So really good teams become self-aware. So the topic of self-awareness is actually an important topic in growing teams into functioning very well. And you can see the difference in teams that are just formed, teams that don't much like each other, and teams that are really working very well together. So that's that. Inside of self-awareness, I also put this topic of reflective improvement, examining yourselves and your ways of working periodically and finding ways to improve. And so I have that little picture on the right, which is a 2-column, very simple reflective improvement framework. You simply say what it is that you want to keep about what you're working, and then you write down things you want to try. You do an experiment every month, and you ratchet your way forward over time. We could say more about that, but that's enough for here. And if you ask me questions afterwards, I've learned that my answers are a little bit frustrating to people, and I try to figure out why are my answers frustrating. And it's because theory starts here and comes all the way down, but exactly just barely never touches the actual people who are present, because people are so unpredictable. Almost all of the answers to any of your questions depends on the actual people who are present, which means in a certain sense I can't answer any of your questions because your actual question has to do with the actual people that you're thinking about, and I don't know those people. So I can answer in the theory part, but the actual solution and the exciting bits, this last little percent, that can't be answered. So that's about this. The next section I'll pick up is this idea of cooperative game. And what I want to highlight for you here is that you go to work and you look at your project, and your project is in some position or the other. Probably it's in a not very happy position, if it's like most projects. So you look around and you've not got enough requirements and your design's not good and you don't have enough time and the code's bad and you haven't got communication between your people and the customers. Doesn't matter. That's the position you're in. Now you want to make a move in the game and put yourself in a better position. You could ask yourself, well, should we get some more requirements? Or should we do some more design? Should we do some more prototyping? Should we do testing? Should we do more documentation? What should we do? Anything you do is your next move. If you study the industry and you connect moves, you'll find strategies. One of the things that I do is conduct strategies. I have about 4 dozen strategies, and the ones I really like are ones that are opposite recommendations. Get bigger, get smaller. Put people together, take people apart. Because strategies are always sensitive to the very particular situation you're in. There is no fixed formula for winning this game. You have to be creative all the time. And so it's very interesting to collect strategies and understand a little bit about when is it that we should put the people on the team together, when is it we should separate them. So if it's a surprise to you that an Agile guy says that there are times to separate people, it's true. We've used it as a winning strategy in certain projects. It's interesting to know the properties of your system so that you know when to separate people and when to put them together. Okay? So what I've got here is a little chart just to show different kinds of games, just to show how the word game comes into the picture. I've got on the left competitive games like we're used to, and on the right, cooperative games. We start very simple goal-directed, finite games like chess, like tennis. You count the number of points in the tennis match, you look at the positions on a chessboard, you know exactly when the game is over. It's a different category of games which come to an end, but they don't end necessarily at a fixed time. They're open-ended games. If you look at children when they wrestle on top of a hill, they don't play 3 out of 5. They keep going till they get tired, or it's nighttime, or they get called in for dinner, and then the game ends. In poker, not all poker games end when everybody runs out of money. Sometimes you're playing and you get a call from your husband, wife, spouse, significant other. You know, honey, it's late. Don't you think it's time you came home? You know, and so the game's over, right? It's over when it's over. What's interesting then was there's a guy called Kars who wrote a book called Finite and Infinite Games. In it, he coined the term infinite game, where an infinite game is a game that should never end. If the game ever ends, it's a fundamental failure in game playing. There you see organizational survival is one of these things. So organizations survive to survive, countries exist to exist, standard bodies become standards bodies that seem to exist, right? And so on and so forth. Now, inside of this infinite games is interesting because we also have career management. So, for example, either you just came out of college, or if you're a parent, your kid comes out of college, and you all give this advice. Don't take the job that pays the most money. Take the job that's the best for the next job. Right? And so that moves in an infinite game where you're maximizing the likelihood that the game continues. We also find, particularly amongst programmers, I will say, that they have to stay current on the latest technology in order to have a viable resume. So we see projects where programmers take the latest framework, whether or not it suits the project. Doesn't matter if it suits the project, it matters that it improves their resume. And I have in fact seen these decisions kill projects, but the project was killed by a programmer who was determined to make sure his resume looked better. Yeah? So we've got this allegedly cooperative game, but we have these threads of infinite game going through it. This just helps us like look around. All this language just helps us kind of look around at what's happening around us. We come down on the other side, what would be a cooperative game that matches like poker? Well, jazz music would be one, where the people cooperate to make good sounds, and they end when they end. There's not a fixed end point. I don't think I've ever heard of a jazz music group saying, guys, we only have 7 minutes left in this set. Right? It took us 9 minutes to get through that piece last time. Let's hurry it up and get through in 7 minutes this time. That's not the way jazz music works. Now, we could attempt to find some patterns between jazz music and software. I won't. I want to get on to the next stage, which is cooperative games that are finite and endpoint directed. And I see some people taking pictures, that's fine, but you could also just download the slides from the website if you want to. Maybe get them all. What's cool about this was I started with rock climbing and software development. And then I found more and more human activities that fit inside this box. What's cool about this is if you understand the properties of games in this box, that knowledge transfers from one to the next. And it's exactly true. We learn this stuff because we're software developers, but in fact, if you look at lean startup, the entrepreneurial stuff, it's exactly the same. What they're talking about is exactly what I'm talking about tonight. which is knowledge discovery. You can apply this stuff to business initiatives, hardcore engineering, theater, publications, lots and lots and lots of ways. So that's really cool. What our goal is in software is to deliver a system at a particular moment in time, let's just say. The trick is that we have to live with it afterwards. To the extent that we deliver the system and we don't set up for the consequent game, which is to extend the system or to build a neighboring system, we put ourselves in a disadvantaged position for the next game. We can deliver the system fine. Just has no documentation, no tests, really crappy code and all the rest of it, but we could deliver it and hurry up. The interesting thing is if you have to live with it, then your strategies change the number of times that you're going to have to live with it. So now you see we're in game playing strategies. So I always talk about strategies. The strategy could be strong if it applies in many circumstances, and it could be a weak strategy if it applies only in a very small number of circumstances. But we're into very creative strategizing for how to move in this game that's always changing. The players are changing, the technology changing, the environment changing, and we're trying to make sense of this thing that's got too many constraints on it. It's a very interesting, very complicated game. Interesting is someone asked me a little bit the difference between product lines and IT systems, and I find that IT systems tend to be in the open-ended finite game category, meaning we know they will have an end of life. We keep an IT system going until we replace it. We build a new system. We buy a COTS, commercial product, stick it in. A product line, on the other hand, has got the properties of an infinite game. So let's just pretend you're Nokia in 2000, whatever the number was, and the iPhone comes out. You quick are scrambling to come up with new modifications on your current product line while you get some fresh development to come up with a real competitor. And so these intermediate stages are moves in the infinite game to stay alive. Okay? So we have particular kinds of moves that make sense in an infinite game that are different than would make sense in the finite games. All right, that's the end of Cooperative Game. I could go on that for an hour or more. It doesn't matter. Just kind of pick you up a little bit through these 5 sections. The next one is very interesting to me, and it comes from lean manufacturing. And when I say lean manufacturing, I actually mean Toyota car manufacturing. That's the reference point for everything. I don't mean lean design. I don't mean Toyota design. I mean lean car manufacturing, Toyota production system, and a lot of interesting things going on there. Now, people say, well, you know, there's nothing in common between manufacturing and design. Manufacturing, you do the same thing over and over. Design, you do something different every time. They can't be the same. It turns out that there's a mapping. If instead of car parts, bumpers, doors, wheels, as internal inventory inside the car manufacturing plant, if you've got decisions, unvalidated decisions, so if you have a design team working, and think about your own company right now, everybody is waiting on somebody else for a decision. And you make a dependency diagram of who is waiting on whom for what sort of a decision. You get a picture like this. And all of those decisions are stacked up inside the company, constitute internal inventory. Decisions decay over time. Decisions stack up. Decisions take time to resolve. If you make a picture of your organization and you map where are the stacks of design decisions, you get a picture that looks remarkably like a manufacturing flow line. And in fact, as close as we can tell, has got all the same properties as a manufacturing flow line. So with one move, all of manufacturing literature drops into our laps and we can make use of everything from Toyota production. One of the things that's different with design compared to manufacturing is these feedback arrows. There's rework. Because you have a design idea, you show it to somebody, it gets broken, you have rework to do. So the math gets more complicated, but the properties are the same. And if you live with this picture for a while, you understand why manufacturing people hate rework. Those arrows going back are really bothersome to the system and cause all kind of inconveniences in the flow. But the cool part is it maps. So here's your average organization with a lot of requirements come in, and a lot of, each requirement has got a bunch of decisions built into it. So when someone hands you a fat requirements document, you have a lot of unvalidated decisions to work your way through and validate or break or change. So then the designers go off and they make a bunch of design decisions. That's all stacked up. Then they give it to the testers break them and throw this pile of change requests back to the various designers. And now we've got this problem of we've got the rework requests and new work requests. And if you look at the Agile literature, it's full of strategies for dealing with rework compared to new work. Lots of strategies. And this is a little note. When I was in Germany a few years ago, somebody gave a wonderful talk called "Don't Track Bugs, Fix Them." And the bug tracking was a series of post-it notes on the wall. So if you get down to 12 bugs or less, you just put them on post-it notes. You don't have to track them. You don't have a bug tracking system. You don't have to document all that stuff. You just write a post-it note, and if there's less than 12, people just walk over to the wall, take one off, and fix it. Think about how much time you could save. Interestingly enough, in this diagram, the little loop from the testers to the programmers is the one you can basically get rid of. Oh, bad news, oh, programmers. Just don't make any more mistakes. Actually, the real phrase is, when I see this happening, and I've seen it happen a few times, the team which includes a tester, says, "No bugs leave our room." And then you can do that. Okay, the other ones I can't get rid of. So now if you apply lean ideas, you would have the smallest possible request item coming in, the smallest possible piece of work coming out, and you would have queue sizes between the groups that have got a very small number of things on, and you would balance the flow in the organization to load balance across the whole organization, and now you've got a continuous flow system. Okay, this is probably what your organization looks like. This is what you would like your organization to look like. There's a lot of math, there's a lot of experience, there's a lot of stuff that supports all of this. I'm only showing you this is part of the big story, but it's very important. Because we're going to talk about decisions next, and it's kind of interesting to understand that you want to limit the number of decisions that are hanging about inside your company or inside your project. And this picture allows you to do global optimization. So you're not just staring at the programmers or staring at the testers in isolation, but you get the whole picture and you get to do global optimization. Super cool stuff. All right, the last one I'll pick up is craft. Craft should be pretty easy, I guess. To me, craft is about learning skills in a medium. So the medium for a requirements analyst, business analyst, is understanding something about how to extract wishes and thoughts from the user community and the business experts. If you're a UI designer, it's something about making use of a two-dimensional medium for input and output. If you're a programmer, if you're a C++ programmer or a Ruby programmer, you've got slightly different media, testers, etc. Project managers, the medium is people. You have to learn about people. That's what the medium that you're working in is. So we take a look at all of our particular professions in the entire corporation. We think that if we're in a craft profession, you never stop learning. If you meet anybody who's a craft professional in any craft that they feel like they're in, they're learning forever how to make better use of their medium, and as the medium changes, they track that. So I never want to hear any programmer ever say again, I learned programming 10, 15, 20 years ago. It hasn't changed. Programming changes every 5 years as close as I can tell, and if you don't update, then you're falling behind. So I keep relearning programming every time. What I've got here are 3 pictures. These are kanji characters. They come to me from Aikido, which I don't do, but I read about it and I understood. I understand it comes from the Japanese No theater. But these are the 3 stages of learning, and they're very, very important, which is why I put them in this slide. Shu, Ha, and Ri. And Shu rhymes with Shu, you know, like the stuff, fortunately the same in German. And as one person said, one shoe can't fit all. So this is what we're going to go after. But anybody who starts in a field of learning comes in through the doorway called, show me one thing that works. Wow, it depends. You know, there's about 8 different ways. No, just show me one. Pick one. Even I know Shu Hari, I haven't got the brain to learn 8. Give me one. Make it a good one, make it generally applicable, and I will test myself on whether I can do it or not. That's Shu. Now the problem is people get very comfortable once they learn a Shu level technique. It works, it's cool, they don't have to think too hard anymore, and they want to stay there. We call that getting trapped in the shoebox. So my job is to kick people out of the shoebox. Yes, everybody who comes in must learn through a Shu level technique. There's no escape, and you better get out of that shoebox and get to the next stage, which is Ha. Ha is where you go collect techniques. You learn Scrum, TDD, BDD, FDD, TQD, I've got no idea what. And you learn them all, the D thingies, and then you that's your job, is to collect them all. If you're lucky, you get to the final stage, which is Ri. Ri means leave. So in the martial arts, that would be when the person has learned everything from the master, and they leave the dojo. They go out on their own, and they do whatever they do. So people at the Ri level don't even know what they do. They do everything by reflex. It's a full body experience. They can't tell you what they do. That's normal at the Ri level. So now Shu and Ri are in complete opposition, because the Ri level practitioner says it depends. Depends on what? Well, it depends on every little detail in the situation. They'll do this or that, unpredictably it seems. The Shu people go crazy because they want one thing that works every time. Just give you a tiny example of Ri. I'm visiting, in this case it was Nokia, I think I can say that's not a problem. And they were doing a Scrum project, and they had programmers in China. They had the UI designers in Helsinki. And they said, Alistair, we've got a problem. The Chinese programmers will not give us a sprint commitment. They don't know, because they say the UI designers in Helsinki keep changing the UI design unpredictably, and as a basis of that, they can't make a sprint commitment. So I go, okay, well, that's strategy. The strategy is pretty straightforward for that. You work in 2-week cycles. The UI designers lock their design. It stays stable for 2 weeks for the Chinese programmers, and then it gets an update every 2 weeks. And they said, yeah, but we sent the UI designers to China, and they didn't have any trouble. Well, what's the problem? I said, well, it's completely different. Of course they don't have any problem, because when they're in China, they're in dialogue every day. The Chinese people are not surprised. They see that this is coming, how it's coming, how much it changes. They're comfortable with it. They don't come in the morning and find out those crazy Finnish people have pulled out the carpet underneath them and given them a whole new interface. No, they understand it. So you have 2 completely different strategies. If the UI designers are in Helsinki, you do pipelining with 2-week freezes, and if they're in China, then you don't have to do that. You could do full flow. Same people, same assignment, same methodology, same everything. You take 2 people, you move them from point A to point B, you get completely opposite recommendations. So that's context sensitivity with Ri. Okay, there's a Ri level example. All right, so those are the first 4. And now that I've wasted a half an hour of your time before getting to the main point of the talk, I'll get to the main point of the talk, which is something that's been occupying me since about 2009 and is the heart of some really interesting strategies when I watch people working this way. Very non-obvious, not matching the Agile literature at all, and absolutely magnificent stuff. So that's where we're going. Okay, so I read a couple of different people who said that design is a knowledge acquisition activity. The output of design is not the product, but it is the knowledge. I happen to disagree with that. I think the output's the product, but okay, we'll just take that under advisement. So I took a little look at what can we do with that, and I started with a kind of a conventional Big Bang integration project. And so we have on the horizontal axis, we have we have time. And on the vertical axis is how much we know, knowledge. And I put on here a diagonal line just showing costs. You know, that salary cost keeps going up. I don't get fancy about the line. And now I ask the question, how does knowledge increase? Well, if we've got a big bang integration project, then everybody's learning a little bit as they go along. Type, 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 talk, 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 type, 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 talk, talk, talk. Okay, they learn stuff. But in fact, all of the magic happens at the moment of the integration, when all of the assumptions that they've made either work or don't work, okay? If it fits, you learned something. Wow, oh my God, it worked. Would you look at that? Okay. If it doesn't work, you get to find out all the places it doesn't work. So there's a massive amount of learning that happens at the moment of the big bang integration. Why? Think of all of those unvalidated decisions coming in right at that last moment. That's when you get to check them all out. Well, that's a pretty unattractive curve, and so my question was, could we do anything to make that curve more interesting, more attractive? So now we're going to take tiny little incremental steps, put their cost curve back on there, and that little teeny stair step you see there is a programmer checking in his or her code. At the moment of checking in the code and running the tests, there's always a surprise. It works or it doesn't work. It works or it doesn't work. Either way. In fact, when I'm doing coding, I'm relearning coding right now, if my test passes, I immediately make it break because I don't believe it, right? So I write some test, I write some code, it passed. I go, that couldn't be. Got to break it. Okay, it really broke. Okay, it really passed. Okay, that's fine. I got that. So every time you check in code, you learn something. So you got small pieces of knowledge being gained. Remember those decisions? You're validating decisions in tiny little pieces. Now, if you were thoughtful about how you stacked up your decisions you wanted to make, you could get a knowledge growth curve that looked something like that. And ideally, you would get a knowledge growth curve that looks like this. So you could ask questions very deliberately at the beginning, seek out the right kind of knowledge such that your knowledge flattens off. And wouldn't it be nice if, like, halfway through your project, you were going to the programmers and you say, can you do this stuff we were asking? And they go, no problem, boss. We got it. We understand the domain, the technology, like anything you want in any order. We got this project knocked. Wouldn't that be great? Doesn't happen very often, but could be arranged, right? Should be possible. So in a sense, the early stages of a project are in a risk reduction mode. And I used to write risk reduction was the same as knowledge acquisition, but about 6 months ago, I learned that knowledge acquisition is much more powerful than risk reduction, and that made it really exciting for me. And then, from the developer's perspective, the second half of the project is just up to the business people, anything in any order. That's very cool. At the end, I'll split this into 3 parts, a risk part, a value part, and a tail part. So you'll see that split come up at the end, but for now, that'll do. Now, there we are, and I put in a kind of a gray line there, the knowledge curve. But if you read the Agile literature, they talk about highest business value first. Well, highest business value first is a strategy. All strategies are sensitive to the exact game that you find yourself playing. So it's one strategy. Some days it works, and some days it doesn't work. It's lousy to hang your hat on one fixed strategy for all projects. That's not a good way to proceed. So I go interviewing projects, and what I find is they go, yeah, boss, we can do it. Give us something meaningful to do. You add business value. Then all of a sudden, they go, oh, hang on. Our framework isn't working as expected. Oh, give us a, right? And now you do some technical knowledge acquisition. You gain knowledge about the technology. And then you go, okay, give us some more stuff. So business value, unpleasant surprise, business value, unpleasant surprise. And if you're lucky, you can now start building a tail on the business value. You do the most important features first, less important features last. That would be an ideal situation. Typically, there's always one surprise that comes in real late, when you think you're safe and you get smacked with something that you didn't expect. But you do the best searching you can to reduce the likelihood of late surprises. So we want all surprises early. I hate the term fail fast, fail often. I'm sorry, I don't fail. So don't give me that fail fast, fail often stuff. Now, if you say, early discovery of bad news, so we have the maximum amount of time to deal with it. I love that. So learn early, learn often is great. Fail early, fail often is terrible. So anyway, so what I tend to see is something that's a knowledge acquisition curve that goes up, but a business value growth curve that's kind of wobbly. You know, if you're a well-run project and then it flattens out over time, that would be normal. But this goes very much against the standard vanilla beginner level Agile literature, which says take your user stories and your product backlog or whatever and put it highest priority first, highest business value first, all the way down, 1 to 200, and just work your way down it. It's a very simplistic assumption that doesn't match the projects that I tend to visit. So we're going to play around with this a little bit more, and we're going to look at the risks that come in 4 areas. Knowledge acquisition in 4 areas, risk reduction in 4 areas. So I'll speak it in risk reduction first and knowledge acquisition second. First is social, business, social, technical, and cost schedule. So the business risk is, are we building the right thing? How do you know you're building the right thing? Wouldn't it be good to do an experiment to find out if you're building the right thing? That's risk reduction, but it's a weak form compared to the learning acquisition, the knowledge acquisition, which is, what should we be building? So you want to have experiments that break your hypotheses early, but you want to continue the experiments with feedback until you discover what is the thing we should be building. Now, if any of you read the Lean Startup book or follow that view, that school that's going on, they use the word pivot. Pivot is the new big term in Silicon Valley. Everybody uses the word pivot. Pivot means we just figured out that our business plan is hosed, so let's go over here and see if we could make some sense out of that. So every time you change your business strategy or your model, it's called pivoting now. So you don't fail often, you pivot often. Pivot, 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 pivot. So the learning is, what is it we should build? The second topic is social. The risk reduction question is, can these people build this thing? Did we hire the right people? That would be a good question to figure out, pretty soon in the story as opposed to late. We just hired this UI expert or this testing expert or this hotshot in whatever. Do they know their stuff or not? That's the risk reduction. Now, the learning acquisition, the knowledge acquisition is much stronger. It's called, how can we take this group of people and build them into a high-performing team that takes a series of activities and experiments and actions and things like that. I happen to like the starting strategy, called simplest first, hardest second. Simplest first because I want to debug the team first. I want to see if they know how to talk to each other. Turns out that after they learn how to work together to deliver something simple, they actually become a stronger team. They become better as a team. So simplest first is learning how to work together so that they can work on the hardest thing second. So simplest first, hardest second. Happens to be my starting strategy, although I'm open to variation. The third area is technical knowledge. Will our solution work? So I never want to hear any more about Agile teams who say, we did all this Agile stuff, but we failed at the end because when we went live, it didn't have the performance and the scaling we expected. I go, you had a missed opportunity. Why did you wait till that long to ask that question? You should ask that question somewhere in the beginning or the middle, where it would make sense and you have time to change it without damaging the product. So all of these questions typically can be brought forward. That's technical risk or technical knowledge acquisition. And the last one is cost schedule, and that's the one I got from watching a friend of mine working, and he said, Alistair, take a look at this whiteboard here. This is what we're doing on our project. It makes no sense to us compared to the Agile literature. What's going on? So at this point, I only had this first 3 buckets, and I went, wow. They were doing what would be called core samples, and they were like spot implementing new features, and the hypothesis was the old framework and the old API would handle the new requests. That was the hypothesis. To break that hypothesis or test it, they made spot implementations of some of the new features to see whether the API would in fact function or not. And the only purpose was to give some information back to the management to say, we believe we could do it in this length of time. Well, if the old API holds, then it's this length of time. if they have to revise the API, it's this length of time. That's kind of a big question. It was well worth a bit of time that produced zero business value, but knowledge about what it would take to implement these new calls. So spot implementing. So I said, wow, that's very good. So you've got a new category of knowledge, which is the cost schedule question. So many people in the Agile world say Agile means that you don't ever have to give a promise about cost or schedule, which I think that's nuts, but a lot of people say that about Agile. So this is a way of breaking that out and going after it very deliberately. All right. When you do all of that, the benefit is at the end, knowledge is pretty flat, business value is flattening out, and now business, for the first time, is control of when do we ship. I was at Nokia in, I don't know, 2007 or something like that, and they said, hey, Alistair, we've got, 150 products a year, and we've got 7-layer architecture, and we have 140 applications, and each application's got 2 to 4 million lines of C++ code. How can we use any of this Agile stuff to help? I had just come up with this, and I said, well, here's what happens. You guys have got planned a major integration milestone on some new product for June 1st. And everybody's working the old waterfall Big Bang integration way, like you said, like I showed you at the beginning. They're all behind schedule. They play what we call schedule chicken, so they don't have to fess up that they're actually, behind schedule. And then they just wait, and when June 1st comes along, you just have bad stuff happening, right? And the only actions available are work overtime or delay the schedule. It's not nice. If you had been working in this fashion, and they had been doing risk reduction, knowledge acquisition, diminishing business value, so when it gets close to June 1st, the things that they will leave unfinished are clearly the least important things, then you could in any case have the major integration on June 1st and integrate the stuff that mattered. Or you could choose to defer and delay, but it would be a choice, a third choice that wasn't available. You can do the same thing on product launch. Here, Apple is the champion of this thing. When they came out with the first iPhone, it had however many megs of memory. And then 2 months later, it had more memory, and everybody got angry at Apple because, they had to go out and buy new iPhones. When the iPad came out, the first one came out with no modem, and all the Mac heads ran out and got one. Then 2 months later, they came out one with a modem, and nobody got angry at all. All the Mac heads went out and got a second one, and the whole world was happy. So Apple played both sides of this window, this delivery window. They delivered early, and they delayed. So boom, boom, came out with 2 products, scored money on both sides. So this is really, really cool, because now the business is in control of fine-grained delivery of quality and features against time. A superb strategy. And this is not making up. This is, there are people and companies that do this stuff. So that's your goal. That's the reward. So here, just, broken out a little bit slower are those 4 areas again. And this is the part that's the newest, and there's an article on my website about design as knowledge acquisition, which has all of this stuff written down in it. And I extracted from that to bring it here. So, the risk is why won't our beautiful design work? And the learning is how do we correct it? And the kinds of strategies that you get that help this, most of these are pretty ordinary. If you're doing ordinary incremental development, you just shrink the increment size smaller and smaller, and you can get knowledge acquisition and risk reduction with every integration, every delivery, every time you run the test and so on. That's ordinary incremental development, but you could take it to smaller and smaller pieces. The second one is a strategy that I learned about and documented since the mid-90s, which is a walking skeleton. You take your technical architecture and you hook it together in the thinnest possible way. You just run one transaction or one something through it, and you now have a connected architecture. You leave it connected forever, and now you've got one team building out the robustness of the architecture, and the other people building the functionality on top. You get parallel development. It's got a certain cost to it because it's rework. The infrastructure team's changing interfaces. Life is a little bit awkward, but it's an awesome risk reduction technique. So walking skeleton is pretty standard development right now. Third one, documented by Kent Beck in Extreme Programming, is called a spike. And Ward Cunningham, who's actually, the master of XP, when Kent Beck was still a junior programmer, they would be working on something, and Kent would say, well, where do we go next, or how do we do this thing? And Ward would say, let's see what's the least we can program so we can just make sure we're not going down a blind alleyway, that we just could see that we're not wrong with this idea. So they would look at if they could do something in a half an hour or an afternoon that would show them that this idea was not stupid. You don't know if it's going to work or not, but at least you can figure out if it's broken pretty fast. They call that a spike. So a spike is a very explicit piece of throwaway work where you're going after the viability of something. So you would have a spike to see about framework compatibility, API compatibility. You would have a spike to see about scaling. You would have a spike to see about performance. You would do a spike, you could do in fact a spike to see how fast your developers learn a new framework or perform something. So these are small throwaway experiments whose sole purpose in life is to give you a piece of knowledge that will allow you to move forward with some confidence. Those are spikes. Been in the literature for 15 years. And then most recently, my friend Jeff Patton, who rants and rails against the Scrum backlog idea, which he thinks as a product owner, he thinks is the stupidest thing ever. It's good for the programmers. Programmers don't have to look up. You just feed them everything from 1 to 200. But from the product owner's perspective, it's pretty broken. And he said, what I want to do is I'll take a story and I'll split it into 2 parts. I'll do a part that I think is mandatory and leave open a part that I think is optional. So I don't actually finish the story. I didn't finish all 20 stories. In fact, I have finished 40 stories. All of them are adequate to deliver. So if I run out of time, I actually deliver 40 stories worth of value. But if I have time, or if I want, I could choose a subset of the 40 and add the second half, which is some real glossy piece. Really pretty, really nice, really refined. But I don't want that effort on every single story. So he calls that story splitting. I'll give you the example that I discovered on story splitting. I was working on my website with this guy who's a good programmer, but he's very silent. He makes Finns look talkative. When you talk to him, you have to listen to the silence to decide what's going on. So we've been working for a couple of months every Tuesday and Thursday morning, and I had a media wiki engine, so I was using media wiki markup in my website, and we were going to textile. We were going to have to do a database conversion. We've been doing all this stuff with the story cards and the things and stuff. And then one day I said, we haven't talked about data conversion. And he was standing about this far from me, which was good. This would not have worked on a video line, on a Skype video. And I saw his eyes go. So I thought about that for a bit. I said, you don't like that topic, do you? And he said, no. So I thought about that for a bit, and I said, you don't know how to do that, do you? No. Guess what we're doing today? So we did data conversion that morning. So it took us about 40 minutes. We called up people. We tried outsourcing. We did stuff, downloaded kit, whatnot. We converted just enough to demonstrate that we knew how to convert. Obviously, it didn't make any sense to convert. We didn't have a database to convert. All I wanted to know was there wasn't going to get to the end of the project and he would say, oh, conversion, shit, I don't know how to convert that stuff. Yeah, I didn't want to hear that sentence at the end of the project. So we did that. And footnote, on the story, a month later, I got a bill from a contractor of his who had written an algorithm, a program to convert the data thingy. I called him, I go, what's this bill for? He says, well, remember when we were starting, we called that guy and I left him a voice message saying, can you do this? Well, he went and programmed it, and a month later he got done, turned in his program, and turned in the bill. I said, yeah, but we got rid of the need of that guy after like 15 minutes. Why did he just keep working? So if you're really hardcore Agile, what we learned is we couldn't even ask questions by email or voicemail because we had solved them and moved on and changed the problem by the time anybody got back to us, which was typically 40 minutes, we got done with stories and moved on. So he had to swallow. I said, I'm not paying that bill. We got done. So he had to pay that guy. He had to do whatever he had to do. That's what happens when I stick the thing in my pocket. So you have to watch the whole talk all over again. Actually, I'll bet I know what slide I was on. Let's just see if this works. Good deal. All right, so that's where we were. Story splitting. So there's an example of story splitting. We have a story called Convert the Database. We split it into two parts. Risk part, do we know that we can convert the database? Yeah, we established that. It took some time. We did it. And then the actual value part, which we put at the end, is we're all done. We convert the database. Yeah, story splitting is a good way to deal with technical risk. Social risk, which is how do we make people a stronger team. There's a thing from sociology called small wins. If teams have lots of small victories, they actually become more powerful as a team and more robust and more confident and more capable and all kind of good things. So the way of phrasing that is early victory. Give your team an early victory. And it doesn't matter what you do to find a way for them to win. This works, by the way, in business meetings also. If you have a team and it gets to the end of the day and they have no victories, I've seen some facilitators totally design a final kind of an activity, exercise, or question such that they can get closure on something and have a victory at the end of the day. So early victory. Walking skeleton that I just got done talking about, which is connecting the architecture, provides a technical version of an early victory. So walking skeleton, early victory fit together. It's why I go after simplest first, easiest first, hardest second. I want an early victory. So that's why I tend to do that. It's all in the social learning. And the final one, well, those are the ones there. So there are other ones and you play with them, but you're looking for how do we make this team a stronger team? How do we let them learn how to work together? Not just have we got the right people, but there's actual learning to do on how we work together. The third one, the cost schedule one, I mentioned that. So basically this idea that I don't much care for, which is Agile means that we don't have to give a time estimate. I don't know where that comes from. My first Agile project was a fixed price, fixed scope project of about $15 million in the 1950s. 50 people, 1.5 years, 3 technologies. It was a pretty decent sized project. And as I've learned since then, it was one of the few small talk projects that succeeded. In the 1990s, most people failed, and we used everything that I know about to make that work. We used all the Agile techniques. The only thing was the requirements didn't change. But otherwise, we used Agile top to bottom. So I have no idea why people say you can't give an estimate. However, we can use this idea of core samples to say, well, I don't know what's underneath that thing, so I can't give you an estimate. Well, okay, I think it's really valuable that we have an estimate that makes some sense. I'll give you some time. How much time would you need? Could go do some experiments and you could come back with a decent number. Oh, that's a waste of time. Now, we're very, very busy developers. We haven't got any time. We got nose to the glass. No, we can't do that. All the developers say, you managers would not like us to spend any time away from the glass doing like this estimation stuff. And the managers say, yeah, actually, I want you to do that. That would make my life really good. Thank you very much. And here's an odd sentence. I've heard programmers say, I know my manager told me to my face that early delivery wasn't the most pressing thing, that lower defects and higher quality was more important, and the schedule could actually be delayed to get higher quality, but I don't believe him. And I said, if you don't believe it when he tells you to your face, what can I do? Nothing, because they all lie. So what can you do? But, in fact, by and large, the business people understand that, most of the time, it doesn't matter if the thing's going to come out in November or December. So if you spend some time figuring out if it's going to come out in, if the delay is go from November to December, but the reliability of the estimate goes way up, then they're pretty happy. Right? So you have that discussion. You have the chance to have the discussion. So microcosm or core samples is your way. And the final one, and then now this gets us into the lean startup stuff. Everything to do with prototyping, showing people mock-ups, showing them paper prototypes, any of these kinds of things are helping you understand what is it people could really use. Ambassador user is if you get somebody who's a real user. This is typically for IT systems. You get an internal user who comes and lives with the team for a period of time. Not too long, maybe a month, 2 months. I've seen it done up to 6 months. Then they go back to work. So you have ambassador users. Early delivery, you have the smallest thing that could possibly deliver value. You deliver it as early as possible because you're pretty sure it'll break somewhere, but you don't know where. So you deliver it early, so you have the maximum amount of time to correct it. And then this last one is straight from the Lean Startup book, empty delivery and manual delivery. So people are testing the business hypothesis by buying some AdWords or putting up an empty link and just seeing who clicks. If anybody clicks, they're interested. I'm told that in this game in Facebook, I don't do it, called Farmville. It's a very popular Facebook game. They're using this, and now they've gotten to the point, so rumor reaches me because I haven't checked it, that they have things that you can do, and if you click on it, it'll say, not implemented yet. Would you like us to build this? And they've gone one step further, so rumor reaches me, I haven't checked it, that it'll say, if you want us to develop it, put money from your PayPal account into escrow, we'll keep it, and if we haven't developed it in 6 months, we'll return your money, otherwise you will use your money to develop that feature. And that is real business knowledge, right? If people put their PayPal, $50 from their PayPal account, then you'll go develop the feature. So real business knowledge. That's called empty delivery. You delivered nothing. The other one that I hear about all the time, and I just saw a really long lecture on it on YouTube a couple of days ago. Where was it? I was at the IT conference in Kiev 2 days ago on Saturday, and the director of Adobe was telling the story about some people who had an idea for a business, and what they wanted to do was to make some super smart touch-ups of photographs. So they went online and they put up an empty web page. It took them about an hour. They're obviously better than I am. Empty web page. It said, if you want us to touch up your photograph, click on here and send us an email, send us the photograph, and tell us what you want to do with it. And about, I can't remember if it was 200 or 800 people, sent in photographs. So what did they do was they had their own employees use Photoshop, and they fixed up the photos as per the request and sent them back. And they got some money for it, however much they charged for that. So from this, they established that, in fact, people wanted this. And then they said, yeah, but how would we really do that with our employees? So they opened up another website and said, looking for people who use Photoshop to do cottage industry work, would we'll pay you this much to touch up photographs for us. And then they started feeding them the photographs to see if anybody would actually do that. And apparently there were enough people who did. So then they hooked the two together, got out of the middle, and just made money. Like that. So that is empty delivery at first, but manual delivery second. And later they could look about automating that. So there's lots of stories about this. Very strange ways. But what they're trying to do is to debug the business idea before they've done any actual hard development work. So those are some ideas, knowledge acquisition. All right, so now I propose that possibly you could take your project and split it into 3 parts. So each user story, imagine just conceptually that each user story had 3 little tear-off sections that matched those colors. A risk part, a value part, and a tail part. And now your project plan is to take the user stories and you put them into 3 columns, and now you can strategically, as you wish, you could go down all the risk parts, then all the value parts, then all the tail parts. Or you could go risk, value, tail, risk, value, tail, risk, value, tail. Each one, which is the conventional, some diagonaling or spot, whatever. This is a map of your project, and you can create a strategy that suits you. That's the maximum utilization and value you can get out of your team in the time available, looking at risk, value, and tail. So that kind of gets me to the end of what I wanted to say. It's very non-obvious to me. It's got some really interesting subtle points. I see teams doing this by intuition. They know that this is the thing they need to do. And what I've done is to deconstruct it and recompose it in words so that you could do this deliberately. And I would be very interested if anybody chooses to try it. The 3-column table on work to be done, risk value tail, and then tries to deliberately strategize the way through it. That would be interesting as an experience report particularly. So that is what I have to say, and I left a lot of time for questions afterwards. And I think that the article is just called Disciplined Learning, I guess, on my website. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. How's about that? How do you want to do the question-y thingies? We'll have a microphone.
I will ask my question in English.
Thank you. The beer is worn off, so is my Swiss German.
So why do you distinguish between knowledge and business value? To me, knowledge is of value to the business, so I don't know the real difference between it.
All right. Very good question. There are people who take this idea about business value and say that all knowledge is value to the business. Many things are valuable to the business, but don't put anything in your bank account. So for me, when I'm saying business value, if I deploy a piece of software that lets somebody buy something or do something where I get money in my bank, that's business value. That's value in the sense of like money in the bank account. Knowledge is, yeah, could be, might be, potentially valuable, but it's not actual value. Whereas when I ship a feature, then I'm getting actual value. So that's my distinction. And I understand that there are people who prefer, like, take the hardcore. But if you take it the hardcore, then you can get knowledge and 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 never ship anything, and you go out of business very smart. And that doesn't interest me. So when I say business value, I'm talking about things that put the money in the bank. My selection of words, okay? Okay, beer time.
Hearing your talk, I associated with your knowledge acquisition and value building, those things which are going on in the moment at Costa Concordia. They spend a huge investment of time into this area of knowledge and risk reduction to be sure that to bring the ship on, in the upside direction. And now they are doing it, they are creating value. Would you say that that's also an example how to do such very, very complicated and risky work? First, to accumulate knowledge.
Now, was that the Concordia, is the ship that tipped over and sank?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. I'm not always up on these.
Yeah, exactly. So they did a lot of prototyping and simulation, but all was theoretical. And now they are doing it in reality.
What are they actually doing now that's different than before?
They are pulling up the ship.
Yeah, it's a bit late, isn't it? This is...
But what would be another option?
So if I go look at my slides, looks to me like you're saying, sorry, excuse me for this. Oops. So you're saying this is also a risk, this is also a knowledge acquisition curve. And I say, I agree with you. That is one particular strategy for knowledge acquisition. You build a ship, you put it out, like the Vasa, you know, in Stockholm. Are you familiar with the ship, the Vasa? Wonderful, built in the 1600s, 3 gun decks high. They had never built a ship with 3 gun decks high, but the Swedish king heard that the Danish king had a ship with 3 gun decks high, so he demanded a ship with 3 gun decks high. And of course, if you're the shipmaster, you don't tell the king no. You put 3 gun decks high. It sailed out of the harbor and tipped over and sank, and lay there for 300 years, and they dug it up, right? So this is, it's a knowledge acquisition strategy that has certain properties. And what you're saying is the Concordia followed this knowledge acquisition strategy instead of the other one. Yeah, it's knowledge acquisition, absolutely. Okay, next. We have an arm up here. I'm glad you have 2 microphones.
Hi, I just want to know what's the tail part of the whole thing?
Well, the tail part is can be quite a lot of things. One could literally be defects. So you could write, code with bugs in it. You guys do this all the time. You do this all the time. You've got 1,000 defects left. You rate them in category 1, 2, 3. You ignore all the category 3. You do the category 1, then you declare all the category 2 items to be category 3 items, and you ignore them, and you ship the product. So that's a fine example of trim the tail. What's interesting is some features, are very rich. I want to be able to do this. But when the product owner says, I want to be able to do this, they have in mind all these glorious shortcuts and things that you could do. But you could deliver the basic of the feature without all the fancy things. That would be a second one. Third one would be UI. You have a basic user interface. It functions. To go out and prototype and fix and prototype and fix and prototype and fix takes time. You could ship it with a mediocre. You could take your code quality. You really want to refactor this beastie. But guess what? You're not going to. You're going to ship. Right? So those are examples of trimming the tail in different dimensions. Okay. What else? Yes, one down here.
So my question is twofold. The one is, how do you think about penalty? So business value sometimes is a combination of value and penalty. So if you don't do this, something bad might happen. So this is probably related to risk. I'm not sure about your take on this, or whether you think
I don't know. Can you give me any examples so I can track the question?
So probably a lawsuit or something you need to do that has a negative impact if you're not implementing something.
So what I get out of this picture, the one that goes a bit further forward, is I don't have very many fixed strategies, as I tell, because it's a cooperative game and there's a lot of creativity there. So I couldn't say what's the way to deal with that, other than smart people in the company decide about the risk, the lawsuit, the penalty situation, how much time it's worth to try to deal with that, how much to take on the fly, when to stack it up, etc. What I would hope is that this becomes a deliberate discussion instead of an accidental happening. That's what I'm after. And this stuff is new enough. There aren't enough projects doing enough around this that I've got really more to offer than what I've said tonight. I think for me this is very exciting. I've been living in this for about the last 4 years, and ever since about 7 months ago, I discovered that the knowledge acquisition is stronger than merely the negative of risk reduction. So it's really pointing to a way to a lot of creative, innovative strategies for managing projects that haven't been thought of or documented before. So that's what I've got.
And the second part is about what's your recommendation for a product owner on how to deal with this, for example, with the Scrum artifacts. So it's pretty easy to have a long lane of 200 stories and somehow connect them with epics and things like that. But as soon as you start splitting up the stories in 3 parts, or you think it's pretty hard to track it, or don't you track it at all because probably you only do the risk part and then skip the second part? Or how would your methodology of the new prioritization of a backlog work in a traditional Scrum environment?
That's very good, and I give the microphone back to him. That's very good, because you're asking, in a sense, so this is a very re-level technique right now, right? People do this because of touch and intuition, and I go around and interview them and I try to decode what they say. That's re-level behavior. We're looking for how could we convert it to anything that's shoe level. Yeah? And here I would say I can only point to one guy, Géry Derbier in Paris, who uses the writings of this and of Jeff Patton, and then he was above the project managers, so he was running a set of project managers who didn't understand any of this stuff. So he had them grade all of the features as A, B, C, D, E. E means failed, D means barely above failing, C is usable but not pretty, B is kind of pretty, and A is like that, okay? And he had them grade and turn in reports of what they were doing. So for the stories, they had to grade the quality of the stories. They didn't go for A on everything. And he told them, go for C on everything. That, let's say you have a sprint commitment. Let's just pick this. Your sprint commitment is going to be based on getting everything in all the stories you take to a level C. Then part of the next sprint will be allocating time to take a subset of those to B and A. And the reporting is in this fashion, right? So he was creating a shoe level technique out of what had been a re-level. Now, if you say, hey, Alistair, our product owners are not smart enough to do any complicated intellectual work like balancing this, I can't touch that question. What I can say is it's more difficult. Some people can handle it. That's cool. Those that don't handle it will work with simpler strategies. But the really cool teams, the really good teams, are playing these very subtle tools. It's difficult. Jeff Patton has been describing this since 2002 to me. Like, he hit me over the head with a stick for about 2 years before I even understood what he was saying. And from 2002 to like 2008, I would say to him every year, how are you ever going to make a shoe level technique out of this, Jeff? Because it's all stuff. And he's never succeeded, but Jerry was the first person who really made a kind of a cooked, canned technique out of it. So yeah, it's difficult. It's more difficult, but it's more subtle, and you can see the advantages to the if you can pull it off. Not everybody can pull it off. Let's see what we have for another question. We still have time. There must be somebody in the back who has a question.
So I have a question about the Agile Manifesto. Would you agree with the idea to enhance it?
No.
With a fifth? No? Why?
It doesn't even matter. You don't have to finish anything else because we agreed at the time never to enhance it.
Okay, but it's a pity because the fifth sentence would be learning is more important than knowledge, and this would be a good advice for the religious Scrum masters who regret.
No, they would turn that into dogma anyway. I mean, if you're a religious Scrum master, it wouldn't matter what you put in the manifesto, it would become religious law within no time. So we had this discussion when we had it's a good question, because people keep offering us new improvements to the manifesto. And actually there's the Software Craftsmanship Manifesto. Has anybody seen that? Yeah, that's a really nice up on it. And there's the half-assed manifesto, which is really cool. It's the black humor version of it. But when we met, we said, look, what are we going to do with this thing that we just wrote? And we said, well, it's an accident of history that it was exactly these 17 people. There were 10 other people who were invited and they didn't come. If any one of them had come, we would have had a different discussion. Who knows what we would have ended up with? So what is this thing that we've got? It's a snapshot in time. At 2001, we were concerned with a set of issues. We wrote down a thing. We took a snapshot of it, put it on the web, and said, in 2001, this is what we think. And then we said, we will never come together again. We will never adjust it. It's a snapshot in time. So then you say, wouldn't it be a good idea to enhance it? No, because we agreed at the time, no. Now, if you were going to do it together today, you'd have to get 15 different people. And they'd are wrestling with different problems than we were wrestling into. In 2001, we were really fighting against the heavyweight, waterfall, document-centric, SEI, PMI, CMMI, RUP, all of those things that were super heavy and stodgy and slow. And that's what was on our mind. So we wrote this thing. Now, it's pretty good. It's pretty good advice. It's lasted 12 years. I think it'll last another 12 years. It's just good advice. But if you were going to meet today, different people with a different age, different concerns would write a different thing. So we just leave it alone. That was a really good question.
Thanks.
I'm begging for someone at the back. Sissies. Anybody speak French here? Poulet mouillé, does anybody know what that means? It's on film. You can look it up. All right, any more questions? Otherwise, we could bring it to a close. 3, 2, 1.
Isn't a wish to increase knowledge at the beginning of a project exactly what led to heavyweight?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was an interesting observation. So when I came up with this in 2009, I was deathly afraid, in fact, and it hasn't happened yet, but I actually view that as a potential hazard in this whole talk, is that would people see this as a two-stage waterfall activity. First, we're going to go and gather all the knowledge, then we're going to build a system. So that's absolutely true. Now, the only thing is we have the Agile Manifesto to protect us, which says you better be delivering value, right? So you better be doing that. If you do that, then you need to be doing that. We've got all those things about incremental development, accentuated return on investment through early delivery, all of those things to protect us. But yeah, that's a really good question. All right, that's the end. They're setting up snacks. Quick, rush them before they finish setting up the table. Mob them, knock them out. Good. And thank you very much for your attention.
Applaus.